and welcome to Beyond the First Response. This is Christy Lister, one of your co-hosts with my other co-host, Robyn Michael. And we have two really cool special guests with us today. We have Molly Jones and Hannah Elmore with Advanced Recovery Systems, an advanced approach to patient care. So I only say it that way. I just wanted to make sure because I'm in mortgages. And I wanted to pull up the website so that if I had a question of something, I had it right there to look at. And there's an advanced recovery for mortgages. And I'm like, oh, I don't think they're a collection agency. Yeah. So that's why I'm like, let me make sure I have it right. Robyn always starts out with a icebreaker question. So hopefully she has one.
I do. Yeah.
Excellent.
So I see a little peek of a Christmas tree in the background of Hannah's screen there. And I just had a memory pop up on my Facebook this morning of the very first time Eric, my husband, and our son, Donovan, and I went to get a real Christmas tree. So I was saying that was the first and the last because I have cats and we were in an apartment and it was a nightmare. So are you guys team real tree or team fake tree?
I'm team fake tree pre-lit.
Yes, you are my people.
Where you just shake it up like an umbrella and it pops open.
Yes, yeah, you got to do a little something here and there, but yeah.
I will completely agree with Molly on that. Fake tree, pre-lit, most of the work's already done. Yes. The only problem is then if one of the bulbs goes out, hopefully the rest don't, or there's not some holes in there. So
yeah, that's a nightmare.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. We've got the right people on, Christy. We're good.
I know. And I love real trees, but I'm allergic to them. I had them for a really long time. Yeah. I'm allergic to pine trees. I break out in hives. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not fun to find out the hard way. But
you don't use pine saw?
No. It's okay. I like the fresh linen scent anyway around. So unfortunately I have to have a fake tree now, but that's okay. It's all about the season. And clearly here where I'm at, it's cold enough to have a real tree and it not die in the heat, where some other people on our call right now is at.
That was part of the problem. The needles, I was finding pine needles in the carpet for like the next year.
Oh yeah.
So, no.
Well, and they cut them down. If you buy them pre-cut, they're cutting them down like 4 or 5 months in advance. Yeah. I'm like, no wonder now they fall off right away because they've been dying.
Right. And it's just weird to me, like going through the whole process, I'm thinking, I've just cut down a tree and it's sitting in my house dying. Like, I don't understand what the point of this is.
Right.
When you're a kid, you're like, that's just what you do. It's the process of it. But I don't know, as an adult, like, this is weird. This seems like bad karma.
Yeah.
Bad energy being brought in the house.
Well, it's bringing nature in. But so nature really is one way for us to be able to decompress. But sometimes we unfortunately aren't able to, right? And we're not able to process it and decompress the way we think we are or the way we should. So advanced recovery systems helps with resources on substance abuse. And I'm just going to let you guys do it. So Molly Jones, you're the coordinator, correct?
Clinical education coordinator for advanced recovery systems. But yeah, I can tell you a little bit more about ARS, as we're otherwise known. We are a behavioral health treatment company based in Florida. We started there in Florida in 2013, founded by 2 physicians, and over the last almost 10 years, we really expanded from coast to coast. So we have, as we call them, general population or civilian treatment centers in Florida, Georgia, New Jersey, Ohio, Colorado, and Washington. And I usually like guesstimate here because I'm not entirely sure, but I want to say, just thinking about building and creating a center, probably 2015, we were approached by the International Association of Firefighters, we being Advanced Recovery Systems, to partner to build the IAFF Center of Excellence, which is a treatment facility for active or retired union firefighters, paramedics, and dispatchers. So that opened in March of 2017, and it's really a one-of-a-kind place. There's a lot of, first responder treatment centers out there, which is awesome. And even in the almost 4 years that I've been on with ARS, seen a lot more, develop and come, or a lot more organizations, come to provide similar services as what we're doing. But where we kind of are different is that it's just for those firefighters. So it is really modeled after the firehouse, and there's a big kind of focus on occupational stress and trauma and helping those men and women to get back on the job, after they deal with whether it's PTSD, depression, suicidality, substance use. There's a lot of different reasons why people may come to us. But our whole goal is to help them get back on their feet and oftentimes back to work, and their families functioning, in a more cohesive or healthy way, as well as, on an individual level, helping them to just get back to, where they once were.
So where is the IAFF Center located?
It's in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, which is like 45 minutes from DC or Baltimore. And then we have a West Coast Center of Excellence that will be in the Hemet area of Southern California, opening probably in 2024. So we're hoping early 2024.
Fantastic.
That's going to be amazing. Because I know of a couple firefighters that have attended on the East Coast from out here. So it'll be really welcoming to have a center here for those that want to use it. Do you find, and I'm just going to jump right in, since I'm on the fire side, and I'm sorry, Christy, I know a little bit about this.
Yes.
But do you find that your referrals are coming from, like, how are firefighters getting to you? Are they being referred by their union directly? Are the chiefs jumping in and referring them, or are they reaching out to you on their own? Like, or are you working with their peer support teams as well?
It's kind of a mixed bag. A lot of people are self-referring. So because we're part of, that union or a benefit, to their union affiliation, many of them have good awareness that we exist. So they will self-refer, which I think is really awesome to see, because that means that, they're aware of behavioral health concerns and those challenges, and can recognize that in themselves. And then accessing resources, making those calls is oftentimes one of the hardest parts of going to treatment or getting the help you need, being willing to say, hey, I think I'm struggling. So many of them are calling and doing that themselves. Other times, peer support will be involved. Maybe that peer has reached out to their peer support team, and then the peer support team is facilitating those calls, or giving them a resource or a number to call us. Other times chiefs are involved, the union may be involved, spouses. There's a lot of different ways that people get connected to us, but I would say the majority are self-referrals.
And so add it real quick, sorry, because you said chiefs refer out. I love hearing that one. Two, on the police side, you don't hear about that. So they're, they basically, what you're saying is these chiefs get them help and then integrate them back on the job. And they don't have a fear of losing their job because they were struggling.
Right. Yep. Very rarely is it you go to treatment or you lose your job type situation. Oftentimes it's the exact opposite of that. We want you to continue with the department and continue, in this profession. So let's help you get back on your feet. And I'll say too, to your point of chiefs, we do a lot of education. So I'll do virtual or in-person education for peer teams, departments, locals, spouses, lots of different groups. And it's specific to first responder behavioral health. And more often are there chiefs in the room that are making time. And sometimes it's over the course of a few days, and they will be there for each session, ask a lot of good questions, get involved even in the discussion. And that's probably the coolest part, or the coolest thing I've been a witness to, is the members of that department or of that peer team asking questions based on whatever it is that I've presented to them, and then having this open dialogue with their chief about what's working, what's not working, what are the plans to change this. And I've certainly learned a lot from those conversations about what works and what doesn't. But it's just really encouraging to see those discussions happen and people just being really open with one another. And it doesn't seem like there's that
The stigma.
And also, being an administrator or someone that, at a higher level, like there doesn't seem to be as much fear around having those open discussions about, alcohol abuse within the department, or, we're seeing a lot of people who may be having conflict with one another. And so just really being open about what's going on, kind of giving a pulse check, and then letting their chief know, like, hey, this isn't working, something's got to give.
I love to hear that, because a lot of times, so we offer education training, responder readiness training as well. And often from the police department, you'll get, what we give out an evaluation, what can we do better? And I've seen some don't have administration in the room. And they are not interact. We've only had one or two chiefs or deputy chiefs that in the classes that I've been in, that ask questions, but 98% just kind of sit there. And I guess in a sense, it's almost intimidating, right? You're trying to be open and honest. Yeah. So I love to hear that. That says that something is going right with the program or the education that you are providing, and to get everyone help. So how does that look once they get to your facilities?
So you mean like treatment wise? What does that look like?
Yeah.
So we have multiple levels of care, everything from a supervised medical detox all the way down to telehealth services. So kind of every level of care in between there. People come to us for primary mental health or primary substance use. So if they need detox, they'll obviously start there at that level of care. But something that's interesting here, and I always like to throw this out there just to kind of give some insight to drinking patterns. Many times, if these firefighters have been using alcohol or binge drinking, they won't stay in detox for very long with us. And I think that really speaks to the pattern of consumption. So they're used to, going without. So it's usually a shorter stay in detox, maybe just a couple days, whereas another person or an average general population person may be there for like 5 to 7 days. So they're in detox, or if they're starting at mental health, then they'll admit at that next level, which is residential treatment, which is kind of that classic sort of rehab level of care that people think of. And it's at that point where, they're really immersing themselves in treatment, going to groups all day, every day, every day of the week. It doesn't stop on the weekends. So they're continuing to go to group. They're doing individual work. They're doing some family work, meeting with our psychiatrists and primary care physicians, and really looking at that whole person. Our medical director, her name's Dr. Abby Morris, and she is really awesome in the work that she does, because it's not just focused on the job. She's looking at childhood trauma, military trauma. She's looking at other things that may be driving symptomology, like testosterone. Many of them may be overusing testosterone, or maybe they have low levels. So maybe that's driving some of the symptomology. So she's getting really creative in what she's looking for and assessing for. And so people are normally at that level of care for a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer, and then they step down to our partial hospitalization program, otherwise known as a PHP, and they continue to live on site with us, even at that outpatient, technically is what it is, level of care. But because people are coming from all over, they're continuing to stay with us. And that looks very similar to what I just previously described. So structured programming, the individual, the family work, all of that is still happening. And then as people get to usually about the 35, 40-day mark, then they're looking at discharging, and we are going to get them hooked up with a therapist, or maybe even a group if there's one available in their area back home, get them set up with an appointment, make sure if they're on medications, they're going to have some follow-up for that as well. And one thing that we spend a lot of time doing is vetting these providers. So it's in other settings, there's almost this like luxury of people coming from one location or one general area. So you know who the therapists are, who the providers are, and who you can trust. But because we're seeing people from all over, it was kind of a crapshoot almost of, you know, who are we going to get them connected with? Let's hope that they work with first responders or have this experience and can continue the work that we've started. And we realized pretty early on that wasn't going to work. We really needed to have quality people that we trusted and had vetted. So that's how my position came to be. I started off as a community outreach representative and was doing just a lot of dialing and trying to figure out who does what their expertise is, you know, are they taking new clients? And we essentially created this database of preferred providers to assist with this aftercare planning. So created all of these vetting questions and this vetting process. And then that's who we connect families and individuals to for aftercare or while their loved one is on campus with us. So that's a long explanation of kind of those levels of care and the gist of what we're doing on campus, but it is pretty unique. There's a lot of alternative treatments going on as well. So mindfulness is a big focus of the program, yoga, meditation, grounding techniques, all those skills that they can utilize when they get back home is a big piece of the work that we're doing, in addition to, you know, those evidence-based practices and approaches to treatment.
Now, do you, while all of that is going on for the first responder, do you provide any support for the families that are at home while this is happening?
Yeah, so I'm the quote unquote family resource coordinator, which is just kind of this title that was bestowed upon me. But really all that means is our clinician or our clinical director, clinicians on site, or even our admissions team members will identify pretty early on if a family member is going to need treatment. And oftentimes they do. That's kind of a soapbox of mine is we can't just have this one identified patient. We've got to look at the whole family.
I love
And
that. That's, you
yeah,
couldn't be more right, having lived it. Yes.
Yeah.
well, and I just think too, when someone goes to treatment and then they come back home, that is probably the most difficult thing that they're ever going to do, is to be this changed person in an unchanged environment, whether that's
Thank
at
you.
home or at work.
And it's not like the family doesn't want to support, but if you've been on the receiving end of most likely some type of emotional abuse or whatever, even physical abuse, you're not going to trust that person has changed. You're going to come back and you're still going to be angry. You're still going to be lashing out at them probably, and not trusting that what they're saying is real. So it's like, you know, releasing somebody who's been in prison out to the general population again, and they go right back to the same friends. Most likely they're going to get into the same problems again. So,
and I think that that's something that we recognize, and we do some psychoeducation on campus with families. So there'll be about 4 family sessions that'll happen. And that's really just to kind of explain what's going on. How did we get here? Here's the problem at hand. And here's the plan, you know, moving forward. But I'll use a recent example. A spouse called in for her husband, and my coworker called me immediately because she took the call, the referral, and she called me immediately and was just this basically explaining this family is going to have all of these needs because there was a suicide attempt. This has been a long or ongoing sort of problem in their family. They have young children. And so she immediately identified right there that you need to call this lady and make sure that she knows that we have these resources and can get them connected so they can get their own treatment while their loved one is away. And then they'll also get, you know, some family therapy from us too. But I think it's really important for the reasons you described, but also just we're all impacted, and then we all have our own stuff as well. And maybe our own stuff is impacting what's going on for that responder or contributing in some ways as well. So why don't we all be healthy and heal together?
Yeah. And when saying that, obviously, your family, they're being helped. But when the first responders going back into the work environment, that's going to be very similar to what it was like when they left. So being that you have the chiefs, police chiefs, I'm sorry, fire chiefs, more willing to work with it. Has there been a program or training you give specifically for that department when they have somebody coming back that, it's their tools, it's their handbook to help their department, but to normalize it, because we often talk about normalizing the conversation, but people that know that somebody's been through something, you feel uncomfortable walking into a room as it is, right? Because let's face it, people talk about people.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are those kind of tools? Because that's going to be the family side and that first responder side really are one and the same, but they've separated them so much. Hitting that brick wall, like Ken was put on administrative leave, came back once he was fit for duty, but nothing changed. And 9 months later, he took his life. So what kind of training can be provided or given to them after they know that they've been in recovery?
So we've done some webinars on this topic where we've had peer support team members come on and describe what they do in their own departments to make sure that those individuals that are coming home from treatment have kind of, I liken it to like wraparound care. And that comes from, I think, being a clinician and making sure that there's all these different resources available to fit all these different needs. But we've had those trainings and talked about ways that you can individually support someone just by talking to them and treating them as not that they're abnormal, but making sure that we're treating them as we would any other person, and just getting to know what's happened or better understand where they've been and then what the plan is moving forward, what they need from their peers or their coworkers. So I think a conversation is a really good place to start. But what I always recommend to peer support teams, because I get this question all of the time, what can we do to better support those people, help them stick with sobriety or stick with their mental health treatment even. And what I always recommend is before someone even goes to treatment, have an identified person within the department, whether it's on the peer team or maybe it is a chief or someone at that administrative level, or maybe it's a health and safety officer or someone in your union, but identify who it is that you trust, that you are going to be willing to give discharge information to. So essentially, what's the aftercare plan look like? So that way that person can call you on that day of that appointment and basically just say, hey, how did it go? Did you like your therapist? Did you feel like you connected with this person? Do you think it's going to be a good fit? If not, let's call the Center of Excellence back and see if they have someone else that they can recommend. I think that really helps, keeps people accountable. And I think it normalizes as well, just kind of gets that conversation going. But I think the biggest thing that has to happen, and there's no easy answer here, and I'm sure you guys could probably guess what I'm about to say, but it's the culture. The culture has to change. There has to be, I think, policies and procedures put in place at that highest level, whether it's committees or teams or whatever it looks like, that is in place, that is the natural kind of go-to people or group or whatever you're going to call it that offers that support. And then I think that piece of, not talking about people, I don't know if we'll ever be able to get away from that,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I would love to see those jokes stop about, where someone is. It's one thing
Right.
to have the dark humor about other things, but maybe we don't want to direct that at our peers that are struggling with PTSD or
Right.
something.
And unfortunately, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can remember just going back to what you were saying about having someone that can actually have a conversation with them and check in with them. I remember going back to work after Eric died, and I was So I previously had a stillborn daughter in 2006. And so I remember going back to work then and feeling like all eyes were on me. Everybody knew what had happened. You know, a couple people didn't and asked me how the baby was, but that's another story. But I remember like I had such anxiety going back to work to the point where I almost had a panic attack just walking in the doors. And then it gets to a point of you're angry if nobody talks to you about it, but then you're angry if somebody does ask you about it. So it's like this fine line of somebody needs to say something and acknowledge the elephant in the room, but not everybody. So, and it's not going to be perfect. And that's the thing that the person walking into the situation needs to remember. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be uncomfortable, and you got to get used to dealing with your uncomfortable feelings.
And those are things that we plan for too, you know, before someone goes home from treatment. And usually they're not going right back to work. Usually they have a couple weeks at minimum, you know, before they have to return to work. But we have those conversations with them about, you know, what are those anxieties? What are those worries? How are you going to handle this? And really prepping them for that, because it is uncomfortable for everyone. I don't think anyone knows what to say or how to respond. I think for the most part, everyone wants to be supportive, but it's hard to know how to walk that fine line.
Yep.
But that's the good thing, is being able to, like Robyn said, you know, you're angry either way, and people don't, and often people are struggling the same way. So they are reacting to that anger that's going on inside them because they need to get the help, and they just can't make that step. So showing them and giving them those tools is, I think, ultimately going to allow people to feel safe to go and get that help before it's too late. Do you get a lot of people return, or do they stay?
So we have pretty low recidivism rates at the Center of Excellence. I will say that there are some times that people do need to come back to us. I think most oftentimes, and this is probably across the board for any type of person, not just a first responder, but if someone is admitting, let's say, substance use primary, maybe they've been coping with alcohol, and that is being driven by trauma. Maybe they are focused on getting the sobriety piece under control and maybe not focusing as much time on the trauma piece, or maybe they're not ready to do that trauma work. And then they may need to come back when they're ready to do that trauma work, or maybe they weren't ready to begin with, you know, to really do that intense kind of introspection. I mean, it's hard. No one wants to go to those dark places. So I think it's all about readiness if people do need to return. But something that I am really proud of in terms of what we do, if someone is calling and saying, I think I need to come back, our clinical team that has worked with them, they're going to have a pretty in-depth conversation about, were we the best fit for this person? You know, was it, kind of sounds like a breakup almost. Is it me or is it them? You know, is it something that we're not doing right? And do we need to refer them to one of these other very qualified first responder centers? And maybe one of those providers is going to be able to do better with them or connect better with that individual. So we'll make those warm handoffs, as they say, to those other organizations if we need to. But there's a pretty good or thorough kind of decision-making process as far as returning to treatment goes. But many of our clients too, I will say this, we follow up with people post-discharge, and most of them are continuing to do their aftercare, which is another thing that is unlike other populations of people. Usually it's not a one and done, but I think in other populations with civilians, let's say, it does tend to be, I'm going to go to rehab and then I'm going to come back home and maybe I'm going to do 12-step and I'm going to go back to work. And maybe that aftercare or follow-up isn't always as comprehensive or as in-depth as what it is that we're recommending for these first responders. But many of them are sticking with it, continuing to show up to those appointments and continuing to put in the work. Because I think, Christy, you said it, that the work doesn't change. It's the calls are the same. the people are the same, the culture is the same. So you've got to figure out, how can I stick with this positive trajectory that I've started on and not regress? So I think that's really cool to see.
Well, and that's the thing about first responders, that as we have these conversations, and I even have to remind myself too, you're right, it's not just a one and done, because they're going to go back to work and continue to be exposed. Like, it doesn't just stop after they go to treatment. So I try to, when I talk to the public about what I do and, you know, how can we help them? It's like, it's hard because they're getting the treatment, but it's really going to be up to them to continue doing that work, because the exposure doesn't stop if they want to continue being a first responder.
Mm-hmm. And I wish that I had the opportunity to see more of what happens when people go back home. Because, you know, we usually see them on the front end and have some interaction with their families. And we obviously know what happens when they're in treatment with us. But in my particular position, I often don't get that follow up on, you know, how people are doing. Sometimes we'll see them at conferences or at different educational events that we may be putting on. And I'm always like, oh, please stop telling me all of these things. Cause it's like waterworks when they're just saying like how great they're doing. And I'm just so proud, you know, to hear those things, and proud of the work that these people have put in, you know, to themselves. So sometimes we'll get some of that follow up, but I can't help but think that because of the nature of the work, I'm sure there's obviously going to be more bumps in the road, but I would imagine that sometimes it might feel like one step forward, two steps back. And that can be discouraging sometimes, but hopefully with the personality or the mentality of a responder being someone who's purpose driven, or, you know, has that problem solving oriented mindset, you know, maybe they'll view that more as a challenge rather than a reason to give up. But I'm sure that's not the case across the board for everyone. But I like to tell myself that most people are, you know, sticking with it and have that continued progress. But of course, I know there's always outliers and there's always reasons for continued struggle. So
right.
We're always here.
Out of curiosity, you said you do a follow-up after discharge. How many, and so it's kind of a twofold. You do that. Do you do that for the family members as well, since you've met with them, because they're going to give you a different viewpoint? And how many times do you do that follow-up?
So I'll start with the family piece. No. But that is a good point. You know, the collateral information of, you know, what does this actually look like from the outsider's point of view would probably be very telling. But because we have the one client, you know, that's been a part of treatment with us, that's who we're reaching out to. So we'll call those individuals at the 1 month mark, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. It's for 18 months that we continue to follow up with them. And we're asking questions about aftercare. How were you received by your department when you returned? We'll do assessments for whatever their reason for admission was. If it was PTSD, you know, we'll do some assessments around that to see if that treatment has still been successful. So it's pretty comprehensive in what we're asking. And then we're doing that all not only to help those individuals, but I think a big part of that is data collection, because data is what drives not only funding, but it also drives, you know, our treatment approaches. Is this effective? So data collection and research is a big part of what we're doing as well.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to point out, you had mentioned PTSD as maybe, you know, the cause of it, but I'd like to go just a little bit into that to clarify all the programs that you work with. So we will be right back. We're so excited to be able to start our day with Badge Brew Coffee. Hey, Robyn, did you know they take a green coffee bean and roast them to a rich and delicious brew?
I did. And Christy, did you know that Badge Brew is first responder family owned? So whether you're on day shift, night shift, or the shift of raising your family, Badge Brew will always have your coffee ready and waiting.
Let me ask you, what's your badge of honor? Find out by going to badgebrewcoffee.com. All right, welcome back. I'm going to need my bad brew coffee here because it's gloomy. I keep looking outside and have a lot to do. I'm like, oh, I should have had more coffee today. It's one of those days. We were kind of talking about that earlier. But as we were going to break, I know you mentioned checking in with the client that you had and the recovery, whether it looked like from PTSD. Now, your facilities are really substance abuse based, right? It's more of the detoxing from whether it's alcohol or drugs, or if they are not using those as their coping mechanism and there's another option that they're out there doing, are you treating regardless for PTSD, or is that, do they have to come there with an addiction?
So there doesn't have to be any active addiction for someone to admit to treatment with us. It's about a 50-50 split as far as reasons for admission. So about half will admit with substance use primary, and then the other half are mental health primary. So the active addiction piece, many have that as a coping mechanism. And oftentimes that is underlined by trauma, whether that's occupational trauma or from something else, whether that's childhood or some other type of experience or situation that person has been through. So we're going to stabilize the addiction piece, get people sober, and then look at what's driving this. And then if someone doesn't have that active addiction piece, everyone's going to get an assessment and an evaluation to see, what it is that we're dealing with. But it does look a little bit different for a mental health primary client. We don't have to assess for the active addiction. We will ask about, coping mechanisms, and sometimes alcohol or other substances may be at play, but maybe it's not at that diagnosable kind of level, if you will. So we're doing assessments for PTSD, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, suicidality, different personality disorders, mood disorders. I mean, we're looking for anything and everything that may be the cause, of the symptomology. And then based on those evaluations and assessments, that will dictate treatment planning. And then we have different tracks within our program. So there's a substance use track, there's a more general mental health track, and then there's a trauma track. So depending upon what that primary concern is that individual is struggling with, will determine, what track or cohort they're with throughout treatment.
Do you know what the percentage of first responders go back into the workplace after being treated?
So at our facility, at 3 months post discharge from the Center of Excellence, it's like between 70-75%. I think maybe it's 73, but we'll just say 70-ish% are back to full duty within 3 months post discharge with us. Now, other facilities or other types of first responders, I don't exactly know, but I tend to think that a lot of this data, whether it's about law enforcement or firefighters, you can usually plug in, whatever that public safety profession is, and it usually translates.
Well, and that's encouraging, because often, that the job is what's causing a lot of this, the triggers of PTSD, addiction. So to be able to know that they're still going back into it, because fire is a little bit different. They start up businesses because they get that period where they can, although that's still piling everything on. So It's not like, that's a bonus. If it's up and running when they retire, they have something. But
I was just going to say, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no.
I almost think it's, and maybe this isn't the right way to describe it. Is it a rock and a hard place or a double-edged sword? I don't know. But when you think about what you just said, that it's often the job that may be driving some of the symptomology or the cause of the problem, it's also where they derive all their purpose, and not all their purpose, but a lot of their purpose and their worth and their identity.
Right.
And what a spot to be in, this thing that's hurting you, but you also love it so much. And to try to still live in that space in between, that has to be so challenging.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, do you know numbers. So we've got about 73% are back at 3 months post. Do you have a percentage of that decide it's better for them to retire out or quit, whatever, depending on their age?
A much smaller number of individuals that come to us will be medically discharged, or be able to retire medically. And our facility, our treatment providers will help with that paperwork. But as you all may know, and probably do, that is a big undertaking. And then if you get workers' compensation involved, that's a whole other battle, most oftentimes. So it can be a long journey, I think, for some, but for others, it may be very easy to retire. But I'll also say we see retirees at the Center of Excellence. So we'll see individuals who have maybe already retired because of a PTSD claim or some other type of medical or physical health issue. But it is a much smaller number as far as those who are going to treatment with us and then needing to retire early.
What is there kind of an age range that you're seeing, or a time on the job that you're seeing where these issues present themselves and they reach out to you?
Yes. And one thing that I think is cool is not the right word, but that's the word that comes to mind. One thing that I think is interesting, maybe I'll use that instead, is it's an older crowd. And in my work, in the education that I've done, I don't know if it's my personality or the responders, but I oftentimes find myself in these debates about, different conditions and challenges that people face. And it always gets brought up that, oh, PTSD isn't real, or, that's just a young kid on the job that just doesn't know anything. And, they just got to get a little hardiness or a little bit hardier and they'll be fine. But what we see is not that. We see an older group. I think a few years ago, it was said to me that it was like 15 to 17 years was the average time on the job, as far as clients go there. And to me, when we talk about culture, that shows that maybe the tides are turning, and that this, older group is starting to recognize that I am struggling and it is okay to ask for help. And then what happens is they go back home to their departments, and now they've set the tone or made it okay for those younger generations of people to also admit, whether it's now or in the future, that I think I'm struggling with this as well. So I guess cool is the right word, because I think that is neat to see.
Well, that's actually real quick. I'm sorry, Robyn. It's about 12 to 13 years is what don't quote me on that, but I think it's 12 to 13 years that the average first responder taking their life has been on the job. Mm-hmm. So to see that just that slight pivot of it's okay to talk about it, hopefully that we'll start seeing those numbers change.
Yeah, I think that would be very encouraging to see those numbers change, because you think about the amount of rocks that you put in that backpack over 15, 17 years, 12 years. That is a lot of stuff to open up and process and look at. And I just think, gosh, if you would have just done the preventative treatment, or maybe gone to treatment a little bit earlier, even on an outpatient level, maybe this problem wouldn't be as big as it is. And you wouldn't have had to suffer for as long as you have. I think that's the saddest part, is that these men and women I kind of think in pictures, and the way that I visualize it is probably just like white knuckling through years and years of continued exposure to trauma. And how does that play out for that person? It can't be good all the time, even if they're resilient and high functioning, which many of them are. But it's still, I think they've still got to be struggling. Their family is definitely going to be impacted. They're never going to be the same. And I just wonder if that treatment had started a little bit earlier, where would they be now? But that's not to say that treatment isn't worth it, no matter when.
Well, and so those numbers are just, I was going to say too, that so Eric had 14 years on the job, but the problems really started probably, at least where I could see them, around 12 years. So those numbers completely line up. And he got into the fire department. He was already in his mid 30s. So it was a second career for him. So he was on the older side. But I'm wondering too about what you're saying, the differences between the younger generation and I guess I'm older generation now, Christy. What the hell?
Yes, you are. Welcome.
Is that what I'm called now?
Cougar.
I know. Oh, that's a different podcast. Actually, you are, Christy. What are you talking about?
I officially turned 50.
That's younger.
Wow, you look great.
Thank you.
Yeah, 49 over here. So I wonder if it's, at the firehouse, they're getting into these debates with the younger generation because they are the ones that are actually, as far as I'm seeing, and Christy, we've talked about this, that are more open to seeking treatment for mental health, having the conversations around mental health. And I wonder if all of the debates actually do sink in at some point with the older men and women, even though they probably won't admit it to them.
I've been a witness to this in these education trainings that we'll do, and even just in ride-alongs that I've done. You show up at the firehouse. Let's say it's in a ride-along situation, and this happened here in Denver. Showed up, and everyone. It was kind of like in that Rescue Me episode, if you guys are familiar, where the therapist shows up and everyone gets up from the table and is like, "Gotta go." It's very similar to that, and I can remember one of the firefighters standing in the kitchen and just hounding me with questions about the validity of, certain diagnoses and even the work that I'm doing and even the center, and just almost adversarial. It was a very uncomfortable conversation. And at one point, but I was handling it. I was loving it. I was like, keep asking me questions.
I know you're getting wound up. I can see
Challenge
it.
accepted.
Let me school you really quickly. But the captain pulled me aside and he was like, "Hey, don't worry about that guy. Like, he's actually the one that we're all worried about. So keep talking to him." And by the end of the day, this guy was just relaxed, and it was, I do think that it was resonating with him. And there's been other times too, and this was much more uncomfortable because I'm like up there giving a presentation, and someone just keeps asking question after question after question and kind of stumping me in some ways. And it got a little contentious. And at the end of the training, he came up and he was like, "Hey, I apologize. Like, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I just, I question a lot of this stuff." And it's like, it's no big deal. Like, I think that those are productive conversations to have. And I'm grateful that, you asked. And then a week later, he called me, and I thought he was just going to apologize again, but he started with an apology. And then he said, "I've really been thinking more about what you said. And not only am I sorry, but I need help." And I think
incredible.
That's huge.
Yeah. I mean, it gives me goosebumps. Makes me think about it. Yeah. Because that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Right.
It's, even if it is, and it's so cliche, but even if it is just one person, that one person, maybe they don't take their life, and then that saves, the future of all these other people around them.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I have a really hard time. You're probably much better than I am, and keep your cool, but I have such a hard time wrapping my head around anyone saying that they don't believe that mental health is a thing. Like, how, it's like saying that you don't believe breaking your leg is a thing. I can't. There's no, I just cannot wrap my head around it. And having lived through so many situations that have brought me to rock bottom, and living, seeing my husband decline in the way that he did, and my son now left behind by that, how can you look at people in the face, and especially as a first responder, those people that you are picking up off the side of the road after a car accident, and all the families that are being affected by them, and tell them that, "Oh, you'll be fine. You'll just, tomorrow's another day, just man up." Tell that 10-year-old boy to man up. Like, seriously, what are we doing here?
Well, I've totally seen what you're describing, but I think more often what I see is yeah, that's real, but that's going to be someone else. That's not going to be
Yeah, you're
my
right.
struggle. That's not going to be something that I go through. I'm tougher than that. And I think that that's where I get the most concerned, because those are the people that are going to stuff and compartmentalize and not acknowledge what's going on in their heart, in their heads, and get the help that they need. So I think I try to do my best to change that thinking pattern and just change it to, because I really do believe this, that I think we're all one thing away from developing PTSD. You know, I could go get in my car after we're done here and get into a car accident and have PTSD, or, you know, something much more terrible could happen. And unfortunately, those things are so common in our world. So I think it's really important to challenge that thinking as much as possible and just say, okay, maybe you're not feeling this way right now, but you could. It's possible.
Yeah.
And you have to stay mindful of those warning signs or the buildup, you know, to the development of depression or an
Right.
alcohol issue. I just think staying aware that's usually the approach that I take, rather than trying to like hammer it into their heads that 22% of you are going to develop PTSD at some point.
Oh yeah.
You know, just like rattling off these statistics. I think that goes in one ear and out the other. I try to pull at the heartstrings a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that the amazing thing about that is having these, starting it early, we're giving them tools. And
Mhm.
even if they weren't able to get those tools early on, we're seeing by the programs that you have, by the programs we have, those tools, they're taking something from it and learning. So Hannah has been sitting here quietly. But she gets to talk now. So a lot of those tools, obviously we talked about, Molly does a lot of the educational piece at departments. Hannah, why don't you go ahead and let us know? Because you are going to be the resource with questions coming. You are that go-to girl. So do you want to explain the resources and what you can help us with?
Absolutely. I think the biggest takeaway for today is we want to be that person that can offer a resource, whether it's into the Center of Excellence or into our other treatment programs, or whether it's just a question about what's available to them, or an outpatient provider for them or for a family member, whether it's just they want to hear more about what's available to them as a first responder or just in the community in general. We want them to know that we welcome any and all calls and questions, and we want to be that person that can guide them into whatever next steps would be best for them. I do want to highlight one additional program under Advanced Recovery Systems that was developed through the work that we've been doing through the IAFF Center of Excellence over the last 5 years, and that was the development of the Fortitude program. And Fortitude is a specialty track within one of our civilian treatment centers in Columbus, Ohio. And it is for all first responders. So in doing the work with the Center of Excellence, of course, we recognized the need for law enforcement and maybe for non-union firefighters, military veterans, frontline healthcare professionals, especially we saw that during the COVID pandemic so strongly. So the Fortitude program was born within the last couple of years to be able to offer similar treatment for substance abuse and for that PTSD and other occupational stressor related concerns. So if there's anyone listening to this podcast that is working closely with any first responder, whether it's a union firefighter or not, we want to answer that call and be able to point them in the right direction of whatever that looks like for them. Molly had mentioned that we vet clinicians throughout the country to make sure that they are culturally competent in understanding the specifics of the job, understanding the impact on the family, and how we can be that person that not only can provide that mental health treatment, but can really understand the vernacular used within the first responder community and the jokes that they make and all of that. So if someone is seeking an outpatient provider, or maybe they've never received any mental health care before, but they want to learn more about it, we can point them in the direction and help connect them with someone local to them, or maybe a telehealth resource to be able to offer that support.
Quick question on the Fortitude program, because you said it's in the civilian centers that you have. It's important to first responders. I'm sure I already know the answer, but that Fortitude program is kept separate from the civilian program. So
Definitely.
they may be walking in the same building, but they are not commingling.
Yes,
while
so it
getting
is
that
a
help.
specialty track, yes.
Okay.
And it is a mixed within that specialty track of different first responders. So depending on, you know, what that kind of admission looks like at the time, it could be a mixed batch of law enforcement and fire and veterans. It could be more heavily one or the other. Right now, that specialty track is housed in our civilian treatment center in Columbus, Ohio, but it is the goal of Advanced Recovery Systems to begin to implement the Fortitude program specialty track at some of our other civilian centers throughout the country.
And how long has that program been going? The Fortitude?
I believe, Molly, 2 years, year and a half to 2 years.
October was our 1 year. So
1 year.
A year and a half ish.
And are you seeing the same numbers based off of what we were talking, you know, for the fire for this program? Are you seeing the same numbers? Are they similar numbers in recovery and follow through?
So go ahead, Molly.
Okay. I was going to say the Fortitude program as of now is licensed in primary substance abuse with a focus on co-occurring mental health challenges. So that addiction piece does have to be active for admission. So that's going to skew the numbers a little bit. And we aren't tracking data as comprehensively at our Fortitude Treatment Center as we are at the Center of Excellence. The IAFF has put a lot of emphasis on that data collection. So with their help and collaboration of that post follow-up care, we've been able to track that for those clients, but we haven't been able to do as much of that at Fortitude. So we don't have that information.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
I just wanted to add in that I think that it's incredible that you are including non-union firefighters as well, because I know out here in California, like my parents live in a town where it's volunteer firefighter up in the mountains, and you know, dealing with the wildfires and stuff. I'm sure they have just as many, if not more, mental health issues, you know, than.
Oh yeah, living in Colorado, there's so many in the Front Range that are non-union, and that's where all the fires are, you know?
Right. Yeah.
It's mind-blowing to me.
I know.
And not that you have to have, well, I guess they're more volunteer, not non-union. They're volunteer. And I just
applies non-union, I guess, right?
Yeah. And I think about all those properties, all those $1 million houses. I'm like, what the heck? Why isn't
I know.
I don't understand it. And maybe I'm missing a part of that, but I'm like,
well, and a lot of times it's those volunteers that are also losing their own property as well, or their family members are, you know, unfortunately, you know, dying in a fire or whatever it may be. I know the last huge ones we have here have been, that's the case. So it's just like trauma upon trauma. So I love the fact that they now have a place that they can reach out to as well. So thank you.
Real quick, because I know we're running out of time here. Hannah, I did interrupt with asking those questions just to that, but you are the go-to person. So for those that may not watch our YouTube podcast, if you want to provide information verbally, where they can find you and get in contact.
Sure. So what we could also do as well is in sharing this podcast, I'm happy to share my contact information, my cell phone number, my email address. First responders and families and anyone working with first responders, such as clinicians, really anyone that is in need of finding a resource for this population, whether it's the individual themselves or someone related to them, can call me directly or email me if that is something that is needed. I'm also on the IAFF Center of Excellence website. My information can be found there, as well as the Advanced Recovery Systems website. But if anyone wants to connect with me, I encourage them to do so directly, and I'm happy to share that phone number with them. And
do you want to go ahead and give it verbally now? Yeah,
sure.
Because our podcast hits both visual and non-visual, and people are always looking back. Can I get that number? They can then hear it from you.
Sure. So my phone number is 727-506-9036. That is my cell phone. So I welcome, calls and texts, like I said, at any time. But of course, if it is the middle of the night or a different time zone, there may be a slight delay in reaching me. If it were to be a crisis situation or somebody was in need of getting in contact with an admissions team member right away, just due to the fact that, like I said, it may be nighttime or time zone difference, there's also an admissions number that they can call directly. I'll go ahead and pull that up too. Just in case maybe they reach my voicemail and they really would rather not wait for a call back. They can call an admissions number, and 24 hours a day, it will be answered by a first responder trained intake coordinator within Advanced Recovery Systems intake team. So, and then this admissions number is tied to, it'll kind of ping a notification over to me. So then say a call does come in the middle of the night, they get connected with an admissions team member. And then when I wake up in the morning, I can see that this call happened, and I can be sure that my first priority is to follow up and make sure that a resource was connected with them. So that 24-hour admissions line number is 855-441-3024. So like I said,
that's
go
for
ahead.
That's for the Fortitude program as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And really, I mean, anyone listening, first responder or not, we want to help connect you with a resource. So all of our programs, if you have any questions about them or any resource needed, first responder or not, family member or civilian can call that number for assistance for next steps.
Great. Ladies, it was so exciting having you on. These are just more tools for our families and first responders, and the hope and the fact that you see things changing as we do. It brings great honor to all of our first responders that we have lost to substance abuse or to suicide or, you know, to other means of not natural causes. So thank you very much for coming on with us, and we will have those resources on our YouTube. We will have them there for you as well. And we hope you guys have good holidays.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.